The iron bars of the cage bit into Kira's back as the wagon lurched over another rut in the road, sending a fresh wave of pain through her bruised ribs. She pressed her palm flat against the rough wooden floor to steady herself, feeling splinters dig into skin already raw from 3 days of travel. The chains around her wrists clinked with each jolt, heavy iron links that had long since rubbed her flesh bloody beneath their weight. Behind her, somewhere beyond the hills they'd crossed at dawn, smoke still darkened the horizon. Her home, her pack, everything she'd ever known, reduced to ash and ember because of the life growing inside her. Kira's free hand drifted to the slight swell of her belly, hidden beneath the tattered remains of what had once been a blue cotton dress. 4 months along, the midwife had said, just 2 days before they'd discovered the truth. 4 months of carrying a secret that had bloomed into her destruction. They killed him first, she thought, the memory rising unbidden like bile in her throat. They made me watch. Marcus, sweet, gentle Marcus, who'd worked in the kitchens and smiled at her every morning when she came for bread. Marcus, who'd never cared that she was an Omega with no standing, no family left to speak for her. Marcus, who'd held her in the dark of the storeroom and whispered promises neither of them had the power to keep. The alpha of her pack, former pack, she corrected herself viciously, had dragged Marcus into the square by his hair, while the entire pack gathered to witness. Elder Thorne's face had twisted with disgust as he'd pronounced the crime, a low-ranking kitchen wolf daring to touch an unmated female, daring to plant his seed in her belly. He has contaminated our bloodlines, Thorne had spat, his gray beard trembling with rage. He has stolen what was not his to take. As if she'd been property. As if her body had belonged to the pack rather than herself. Marcus had looked at her from his knees in the dirt, his brown eyes full of terror and something else. An apology. A farewell. He'd mouthed 3 words she'd never forget. I love you. Then Thorne's claws had opened his throat, and Marcus's blood had soaked into the earth while Kira screamed until her voice shattered. The wagon hit another bump, and Kira bit her lip hard enough to taste copper. She couldn't think about Marcus. If she thought about Marcus, she would break. And she couldn't afford to break. Not yet. Not until she knew what fate awaited her at the end of this hellish journey. Tribute whores still breathing, one of the guards called from his horse, his voice carrying easily to her cage. Thought for sure she'd give out yesterday. Omegas are weak as newborn pups. She'll need to keep breathing long enough to serve our allies, the other guard replied. He was the older one, the one who'd shoved stale bread through the bars each morning without meeting her eyes. The Silvermane pack requested tribute from all the surrounding territories. She'll do well enough as a camp servant, I expect. They're not particular about breeding when it comes to scrubbing floors. Camp servant. The words echoed through Kira's exhausted mind, and something that might have been bitter laughter caught in her chest. 3 days ago, she'd been a pack member in good standing. An orphaned Omega, yes, but one who'd earned her place through hard work and quiet obedience. She'd kept her head down, performed her duties, dreamed small dreams of perhaps someday being chosen as a mate by one of the lesser wolves. She'd never dreamed of love. Love had found her anyway, and love had destroyed everything. The fire had started at midnight, she'd learned later. Her small cabin on the edge of the territory, the one she'd inherited when her mother succumbed to fever 3 winters past. She'd been locked in the cellar beneath the meeting hall by then, awaiting judgment, so she'd only heard the roar of flames and smelled the smoke seeping through the cracks in the floorboards. Her home burns, Elder Thorne had announced to the gathered pack with cold satisfaction. As her sins have burned away her place among us, she is no longer Ashford Pack. She is nothing. She is tribute. Nothing. The word had settled into her bones like ice. You are nothing. But the child quickening in her womb was something. Was everything. Was the only piece of Marcus that remained in this world, and Kira would die before she let them destroy this last precious fragment of the man she'd loved. The wagon crested a final hill, and Kira's breath caught in her throat at the sight spread before her. A military encampment sprawled across the valley below, hundreds of tents arranged in precise formations around a central pavilion. Wolves moved between the canvas structures, more wolves than Kira had ever seen gathered in one place, their movements purposeful, their bearing that of trained soldiers. The Silvermane Pack's army. She'd heard whispers about them even in her isolated territory. The most powerful pack in the realm, ruled by an alpha king whose very name made other alphas lower their eyes in submission. They said Griffin Silvermane had united 12 packs under his banner. They said he'd killed 100 challengers to claim his throne. They said his wolf was black as midnight and twice the size of any natural beast. They said he was merciless. And now I belong to him, Kira thought, terror and exhaustion warring in her chest. Another piece of property, passed from one master to another. The wagon rolled through the camp's outer perimeter, past guards who barely glanced at the cage and its occupant. Of course, they didn't look closely. She was tribute. Less than a servant, barely more than livestock. Her former pack had traded her for continued alliance, and the Silvermane wolves had accepted her as their due. When the wagon finally stopped before a large supply tent, Kira's legs had gone numb from sitting in the same cramped position for hours. The older guard dismounted and approached her cage with a key, his weathered face betraying nothing. "Out," he said simply, unlocking the iron door. "Don't try to run, there's nowhere to go, and my orders are to deliver you breathing. They don't say anything about delivering you unbroken." Kira crawled toward the opening on hands and knees, her chains dragging against the wooden floor. When she reached the edge, she tried to lower herself down carefully, but her legs buckled the moment her feet touched earth. She crumpled into the dirt, a small cry escaping her cracked lips. No one moved to help her. She lay there for a long moment, cheek pressed against the packed soil, breathing in the scents of the camp. Horses and wood smoke and leather, the musk of dozens of unfamiliar wolves. Her wolf, dormant since the night they'd killed Marcus, stirred weakly in her chest, but couldn't muster the strength to surface. It had been retreating for weeks now, curling deeper and deeper into some protected corner of her soul, too traumatized to face the waking world. "Get up," she commanded herself. "If you lie here, they'll kick you until you rise. If you lie here, you look like the nothing they say you are. Get up, Kira. For the baby. Get up." Her arms trembled as she pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. The world swayed dangerously, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision, but she locked her legs and refused to fall again. The younger guard grabbed her arm roughly, his fingers digging into the bruises left by previous hands. "Supply tent," he barked. "The quartermaster will assign your duties. Move." He shoved her forward, and Kira stumbled toward the tent's entrance, her chains rattling with each unsteady step. Soldiers watched her pass with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Several wrinkled their noses at the smell of her, unwashed, bloodied, reeking of fear and grief. "You're nothing," she reminded herself as their stares scraped over her skin like dull knives. "Remember that you're nothing, and maybe they'll leave you alone." The quartermaster was a thick-necked beta with ink-stained fingers and a bored expression. He looked up from his ledger as Kira was shoved before his table, taking in her condition with a single sweeping glance. "Tribute from where?" "Ashford territory," the guard said. "Omega. She's carrying, but they said that wasn't relevant to the terms." "Carrying?" The quartermaster's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Wonderful. A pregnant servant. Just what we needed." He scratched something into his ledger, the quill scraping against parchment. "She can work the laundry until she drops it. After that, we'll reassess." "It," Kira thought, a surge of protective fury rising through her exhaustion. He called my baby it. But she said nothing. She'd learned that lesson well during her 3 days in the wagon. Speaking only invited punishment, and she had more to protect than just herself now. Someone needs to take responsibility for her, the quartermaster continued, flipping to another page. Sign here to confirm receipt. Assign her to your section. Make sure she doesn't cause trouble. Any volunteers? Silence fell over the tent. Kira kept her eyes fixed on the ground, counting the seconds as they stretched into eternity. No one wanted the pregnant tribute. No one wanted the contaminated Omega with the slight curve of her belly and her shameful story. Please, she thought desperately. Please, someone. I'll work. I'll do anything. Just don't send me back to the cage. I'll take her. The voice came from behind her. Quiet, steady, with an undertone of authority that seemed at odds with its understated tone. Kira heard boots approaching on the packed earth, felt a presence draw near that made her wolf suddenly lift its head with an alertness she hadn't felt in weeks. Finn! The quartermaster's bored expression shifted into something more respectful. You sure? She's Omega, and pregnant besides. Lot of trouble for a common soldier to take on. I'm sure. Kira slowly raised her head, compelled by some instinct she couldn't name to see the face of the man who'd claimed her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair pulled back from a face that bore the marks of hard living, a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow, another tracing his jaw. His hands, she noticed, were rough with calluses, the knuckles scarred from old fights. He wore simple soldier's clothing, nothing to mark him as anything other than common rank. But his eyes were gray as storm clouds, and they met hers with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. Who are you? The thought surfaced unbidden as Kira stared at this stranger who'd volunteered to take responsibility for her when no one else would. He didn't look at her with contempt or disgust. He looked at her like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve, a wounded creature he intended to heal. Come, he said simply, extending one scarred hand toward her. My tent isn't far. You need food and rest. Kira hesitated for just a heartbeat. Every instinct she'd developed during her years as an Omega screamed that this was a trap, that kindness always came with a price, that men who seemed gentle were often the cruelest when the doors closed behind them. But what choice did she have? She placed her chained wrists into his waiting palm, and the moment their skin touched, something happened. Heat exploded through her veins, starting from the point of contact and racing outward until every nerve in her body sang with it. Her wolf surged upward with a power she hadn't felt since before Marcus died, howling a single word that echoed through every corner of her soul. Mate. The soldier, Finn, the quartermaster had called him, went completely still. His gray eyes blazed suddenly gold, his pupils dilating, his chest expanding with a sharp, involuntary inhale. A low growl rumbled from deep in his throat, a sound that should have terrified her but instead sent liquid fire pooling in her belly. His grip on her wrists tightened, not painfully but possessively, as he drew her half a step closer. She watched his nostrils flare as he breathed in her scent, watched his jaw clench as if he were fighting some tremendous internal battle. He feels it too, she realized, shock and terror crashing through her in equal measure. He feels the bond. Mate. After everything she'd lost, after Marcus's blood in the dirt, and her home in flames, and the child of another man growing in her womb, the universe had chosen this moment to give her a mate. This changes everything, she thought wildly, her heart hammering against her ribs. This changes absolutely everything. The world seemed to narrow to the point where their skin touched, Kira's chained wrists cradled in Finn's scarred palms. She could feel her pulse thundering against the iron links, could feel the heat of his hands seeping through metal that had been cold for days. Her wolf, that broken, wounded creature that had hidden so deep she'd feared it might never surface again, was suddenly pressing against her consciousness with desperate urgency. Mate, mate, mate. The word echoed through her like a bell struck in an empty cathedral, resonating through bone and blood and the very marrow of her being. She'd heard stories about the mate bond, of course. Every pup grew up on tales of that instant recognition, that cosmic click of two souls finding their other half. But stories hadn't prepared her for this, for the way her body seemed to recognize him on some primal level, for the way every cell screamed that she'd been waiting for this man her entire life without knowing it. Finn's gray eyes had gone molten gold, the color of autumn leaves caught in sunlight, and she watched his pupils blow wide as he stared at her with an expression that mingled shock with something far more dangerous. Hunger. Raw, undisguised hunger that should have terrified her, but instead made her wolf keen with answering need. His chest rose and fell with rapid breaths, and she could see the corded muscles of his neck straining as though he were fighting against invisible chains. The growl that rumbled from his throat was low enough that only she could hear it, a possessive, primal sound that vibrated through the air between them and settled into her bones like a brand. "You—" His voice came out rough, scraped raw. He swallowed hard and tried again. "You feel it?" It wasn't a question. Kira opened her mouth to respond, to deny, to flee, to do something, but no words emerged. What could she possibly say? "Yes, I feel it. Yes, my wolf is howling your name even though I don't know you. Yes, the bond is already weaving itself between us like golden thread, and I'm terrified because I'm carrying another man's child, and you're going to hate me when you learn the truth." Instead, she simply stared up at him, her eyes locked with his, and felt the mate bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat. The quartermaster cleared his throat, shattering the moment. "Finn, the paperwork?" Finn blinked, and some of the gold bled from his eyes, though it didn't disappear entirely. His grip on her wrists loosened fractionally, but he didn't release her. Couldn't seem to make himself let go. "Right." His voice was steadier now, though she could see the effort it cost him. "The paperwork." He reached for the quill with his free hand, keeping her other wrist cradled against his palm as though she might vanish if he stopped touching her. His signature was quick, decisive, the mark of a man used to making decisions and standing by them. "She's my responsibility now," he said to the quartermaster, and the words carried a weight that went far beyond administrative duty. "Mine to protect. Mine to provide for. Mine." The possessive repetition sent a shiver down Kira's spine. Her wolf pressed against her consciousness, wanting to answer that claim, wanting to surrender to the bond that was wrapping around her heart like honeyed chains. But Kira, the woman, Kira who had loved and lost and carried the evidence of that loss in her womb, pulled back in terror. He doesn't know, she thought desperately. He doesn't know about the baby, about Marcus, about any of it. "Come," Finn said again, his voice gentling as he looked down at her. The amber fire was fading from his eyes, returning them to that storm cloud gray, but she could still see the mate bond burning behind them like banked coals. "You're exhausted. You need rest." He turned toward the tent's exit, keeping her hand clasped firmly in his, and Kira had no choice but to follow. Her legs trembled with each step, weakened by days of inadequate food and water and the constant terror of not knowing what awaited her. The chains between her wrists clinked with a rhythm that had become sickeningly familiar. The camp seemed larger from the inside, a maze of canvas structures and cooking fires and soldiers who turned to watch as Finn led her past. Some of their gazes were merely curious. Others were hostile, raking over her disheveled appearance and the telltale curve of her belly with obvious contempt. "The tribute whore from Ashford?" one soldier muttered to another as they passed. "Heard she spread her legs for a kitchen boy, Probably spread them for half the pack. Kira's face burned with shame, but she kept her eyes fixed on Finn's broad back and forced herself to keep walking. She'd heard worse during her 3 days in the cage. She'd survive hearing it again. But Finn had gone very still. He turned his head slowly, the motion almost serpentine, and fixed the soldier with a look that made the man's smirk die on his face. The gold was back in Finn's eyes, bright, burning, furious, and the growl that emanated from his chest was no longer low and private. It was a sound of pure alpha dominance, a warning that made every wolf within earshot instinctively lower their gaze. "Would you care to repeat that?" Finn's voice was soft. Deadly soft. The kind of soft that preceded violence. The soldier's face had gone pale. No, sir. I meant nothing by it." "Sir?" The word seemed to catch Finn off guard, some flicker of emotion crossing his scarred features before his expression smoothed back to cold fury. "I'm no sir, just a common soldier, like you. But even common soldiers should know better than to disrespect a woman who has already suffered enough." He took one step toward the man, then another. His hand had released Kira's wrist, but she could feel the bond between them stretching like a golden thread, anchoring her to him even as he moved away. "She is under my protection now," Finn continued, his voice carrying across the sudden silence that had fallen over this section of camp. "Anyone who disrespects her, anyone who speaks ill of her, threatens her, or touches her without permission, answers to me. Is that understood?" The soldier nodded frantically. "Yes. Yes. Understood." "Good." Finn held his gaze for one more long, terrifying moment, then turned back to Kira. The anger bled out of his expression as he looked at her, replaced by something softer. Concern, tenderness, things she hadn't expected from a stranger, things she hadn't expected from any alpha, not after everything she'd witnessed. "Come," he said, extending his hand once more. "We're almost there." Kira took his hand without hesitation this time. The mate bond flared at the contact, warming her from the inside out, and she found herself moving closer to him without conscious thought. Her wolf was practically purring with satisfaction at his protection, at the way he'd defended her honor without expecting anything in return. "Don't trust it," she warned herself even as her fingers curled around his. "Don't trust him. You've been wrong before." But her wolf was already beginning to hope. Finn's tent was smaller than she'd expected. A simple canvas structure just large enough for a sleeping pallet, a wooden chest, and a small folding table. It was clean, though, and warm, with a brazier glowing in one corner that chased away the autumn chill. "Sit," Finn said, gesturing toward the pallet. "I'll find you food and water, and someone to remove those chains." Kira lowered herself onto the pallet, her aching muscles crying out in relief as they finally unclenched from days of tension. The surface was surprisingly soft, a thick layer of furs covering what felt like actual stuffing rather than bare ground. Far nicer than anything she'd expected for a common soldier. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. "Why are you being kind to me?" Finn had been moving toward the tent flap, but he paused at her question. When he turned back, his expression was unreadable, though she caught a flash of that golden glow behind his gray eyes. "Because someone should be," he said simply. "Because you're exhausted and frightened and carrying a child that needs you to be strong. Because—" He stopped abruptly, jaw clenching. "Because of the bond?" Kira finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. The silence stretched between them, heavy with all the words they weren't saying. Finn's hands had curled into fists at his sides, and she could see the struggle playing out across his features, the war between the man who wanted to maintain his distance and the wolf who wanted to claim his mate. "The bond complicates things," he finally admitted. "But even without it, I would not see any woman treated as you've been treated. The chains, the cage, The way they speak of you as though you're less than human. His jaw tightened. It's wrong, and I find I cannot stand by while wrong is done. Kira's eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. When had anyone last spoken about her as though she mattered? When had anyone last seen her as a person rather than a possession, a problem to be solved, a tribute to be traded? Thank you, she managed, her voice cracking on the words. Finn nodded once, sharply, then disappeared through the tent flap before she could say anything more. The canvas fell closed behind him, leaving her alone in the warm, quiet space with only her racing thoughts for company. Kira drew her knees up to her chest, as much as her growing belly would allow, and pressed her forehead against them, breathing slowly until the urge to sob passed. The mate bond was a constant presence now, a golden thread in her consciousness that tugged gently toward wherever Finn had gone. Her wolf wanted to follow it, wanted to find him and press against him, and let his warmth chase away the cold that had settled into her bones. But her heart, her bruised, battered, terrified heart, wanted only to hide. He doesn't know, she reminded herself again. When he learns about the baby, about Marcus, about all of it, he'll reject you. He'll reject the bond. No alpha wants a mate who's carrying another wolf's pup. The thought sent a spike of pain through her chest so sharp she gasped. It shouldn't hurt this much. She'd known Finn for less than an hour. The bond was barely formed, still fragile as spun glass. If he rejected her now, before it had fully taken root, she would survive it. She had to believe she would survive it. Finn returned sooner than she'd expected, pushing through the tent flap with a wooden bowl in one hand and a water skin in the other. Behind him came another soldier, this one older, with a kind face and a ring of keys at his belt. "This is Harold," Finn said, setting the bowl on the table beside her pallet. Steam rose from its surface, carrying the scent of some kind of meat stew. "He's going to remove your chains." Harold knelt before her with a grunt, his aged knees cracking in protest. "Hold still now, girl. These locks are old, but I've opened worse." The iron manacles fell away moments later, landing on the floor with a clatter that made Kira flinch. She stared at her wrists as though she'd never seen them before, at the raw, bloody wounds where the chains had rubbed for days, at the bruises layered upon bruises that mottled her skin in shades of purple and yellow. "Ancestors," Harold breathed, his weathered face going pale. "What did they do to you?" "Nothing I couldn't survive," Kira said quietly, though her voice wavered. Finn made a sound low in his throat, not quite a growl, but close. When she looked up at him, his wolf was burning behind his irises, and his hands were shaking with what looked like barely contained rage. "Thank you, Harold," he said, his voice tightly controlled. "That will be all." The older soldier nodded and withdrew, casting one final sympathetic glance at Kira before disappearing through the tent flap. Silence fell once more, broken only by the crackle of the brazier and Kira's ragged breathing. "Eat," Finn said, pushing the bowl closer to her. "Then sleep. You need both." "What about you?" The question slipped out before she could think better of it. "This is your tent. Your bed. I'll sleep outside." He was already moving toward the entrance, and she caught a glimpse of furs being gathered from somewhere just beyond the canvas. "You'll be safe. I won't leave." "Outside? But it's—" She gestured vaguely toward the tent flap. "It's cold. You'll freeze." Something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, that she cared about his comfort. "I've slept in worse conditions. A night beneath the stars won't kill me." "But eat," he repeated, more firmly this time. "Sleep. We'll talk tomorrow when you're stronger." And then he was gone, the tent flap falling closed behind him once more. Kira stared at the canvas for a long moment, feeling the mate bond pulse between them even through the barrier, before her attention was drawn inexorably to the bowl of stew cooling on the table. Her stomach cramped with hunger she'd been trying to ignore for days. The stew was simple fare, meat and root vegetables in a rich gravy, but it smelled like heaven. She lifted the bowl with trembling hands and brought it to her lips, drinking deeply rather than searching for a spoon. The first taste made her moan aloud. Warmth spread through her belly, chasing away the cold hollow that had taken up residence there since the wagon. She drank until the bowl was empty, then drained the water skin until that too was gone. Only then did she allow herself to lie back on the soft furs, pulling one across her body like a blanket. Her hand found its way to the swell of her belly, pressing gently against the place where new life grew. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to the child she couldn't yet feel move. "He won't hurt us. I don't know why I'm so sure, but I am. He won't hurt us." Her wolf curled around the tiny spark of new life, protective and possessive, even as it reached out toward the bond that connected her to the man sleeping just outside her door. Already she could feel it strengthening, threads of gold weaving together into something more substantial than the fragile connection they'd started with. Kira closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her under. She woke screaming. The dream had been vivid, inescapable, fire consuming everything she loved while she stood frozen, unable to move, unable to even close her eyes as Marcus's blood spread across the ground and the flames crept ever closer. She could still smell the smoke, still feel the heat licking at her skin, still hear Elderthorn's cold pronouncement echoing in her ears. "You are nothing, nothing, nothing." "Kira? Kira, you're safe. Listen to my voice. You're safe." The words filtered through the fog of terror, steady and calm and impossibly reassuring. Kira's eyes flew open, her chest heaving as she gasped for air, and she found herself staring at the canvas wall of the tent, at the soft glow of the brazier, at the familiar, unfamiliar space that was so different from the cage she'd been expecting. "That's it. Breathe. You're in my tent, remember? In the Silvermane camp. No one can hurt you here." Finn's voice, coming from outside the tent, she realized, from just beyond the canvas flap. He hadn't entered, hadn't crossed the boundaries she hadn't even known she needed. He was simply there, speaking to her through the barrier, anchoring her to reality with nothing but the sound of his voice. "I dream about fire," she heard herself say, the words tumbling out without permission. "About my home burning. About Marcus dying." A pause. Then gently. "Marcus?" Kira squeezed her eyes shut. "The father of my child. They killed him for touching me, and then they burned everything I had left." Silence stretched between them, heavy with all the implications of what she'd just admitted. This was it, she thought. This was the moment when he realized what he'd bound himself to. A ruined Omega carrying another wolf's pup, damaged goods that no alpha in his right mind would want. "They killed him," Finn said slowly. "For loving you?" The question was so unexpected that Kira's eyes flew open again. "He was low-ranking, a kitchen worker. Omegas aren't supposed to. We don't get to choose." She broke off, frustrated by her inability to explain the rules that had governed her entire existence. "I was supposed to wait until an alpha claimed me. Instead, I gave myself to Marcus, and when they found out I was pregnant, they decided we both had to be punished. But they only punished him. They punished us both," Kira whispered. "They made me watch him die. Then they burned my home and sold me as tribute. They kept me alive because I was still useful. Still had value as a servant, if not as a mate." Another long silence. When Finn spoke again, his voice was rough with something that sounded almost like pain. "The child you carry, you loved its father?" "Yes." There was no point in lying, not about this. "He was kind, gentle. He saw me when no one else did, and he loved me despite everything that should have kept us apart. The baby is all I have left of him now." She waited for the disgust, for the rejection, for the cold declaration that no alpha could bond with a female carrying another's pup, that the mate bond between them was a cruel joke of fate that could never be honored. What she heard instead was a soft exhale, barely audible through the canvas. "Then the child is precious," Finn said quietly, "because it came from love. And anyone who tells you otherwise is a fool." Kira's breath caught in her throat. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and unstoppable. And this time, she didn't try to hold them back. She pressed her hand against the canvas wall of the tent as though she could reach through it, could touch the man on the other side who was saying all the things she'd never expected to hear. "You don't—" She had to stop, had to swallow past the lump in her throat. "You don't hate me? For carrying another man's child? Hate you?" Something like a growl entered Finn's voice, though it was directed at himself rather than her. "I couldn't hate you if I tried. And the child is innocent. A life created from love is nothing to be ashamed of, no matter what circumstances surrounded its conception." Her wolf was practically vibrating with the need to go to him, to push through the canvas and throw herself into his arms and let the mate bond finish weaving itself between them. But Kira held herself still, clinging to the last shreds of caution that had kept her alive this long. "The bond," she said carefully. "What does it mean to you?" A pause. "It means everything," Finn admitted, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "And nothing, if you don't want it. I won't force a claim on you, Kira. I won't take what isn't freely given. If you need time, if you need space, if you need me to keep my distance while you heal, I can do that. The bond will wait. The bond will wait." Fresh tears slipped down her cheeks, and Kira found herself laughing through them. A broken, incredulous sound that held more relief than joy. When had anyone ever waited for her? When had anyone ever put her needs above their own desires? "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Alphas don't. They're not supposed to—" "I don't care what alphas are supposed to do," Finn interrupted, his voice fierce even through the tent wall. "I care about what's right, and right now, what's right is letting you rest, letting you heal, letting you decide what you want without pressure or coercion." Another pause. "I'll be here when you wake. We can talk more then, if you wish. Or we can say nothing at all. Whatever you need." Kira pressed her forehead against the canvas, feeling the rough texture against her skin. The connection between them glowed warm and patient. For the first time since Marcus died, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. Sleep, Kira." His voice was gentle now, all the fierce protectiveness banked beneath layers of tenderness. "I'll keep watch. Nothing will harm you while I'm here." She believed him. Against all odds, against every instinct that had kept her guarded and suspicious for so long, she believed him. Kira lay back down on the soft furs, one hand resting on her belly and the other pressed against the wall that separated her from her mate. A warmth bloomed in her chest where the bond had taken root, a gentle counterpoint to the cold fear that still lingered in the corners of her mind. "Tomorrow," she thought as sleep began to pull her under once more. "Tomorrow I'll try to make sense of all this. Tonight I'll just let him keep watch." And for the first time in days, weeks, months, Kira Ashford slept without dreaming of fire. The morning light filtered through the canvas of the tent, pale and golden, painting stripes across the soft furs where Kira lay curled on her side. She woke slowly, gradually, her body heavy with the kind of deep rest she hadn't experienced in what felt like years. For a long, blissful moment she simply existed, warm, safe, wrapped in furs that smelled of pine and something distinctly masculine that made her wolf purr with contentment. Then memory crashed back in, and Kira's eyes flew open. The mate bond. Finn. the way he'd spoken to her through the canvas, offering patience and understanding when he could have demanded so much more. The way her wolf had recognized him, had reached for him with a desperate hunger that terrified her, even as it filled her with warmth. She sat up slowly, one hand automatically moving to rest on the gentle swell of her belly. The child, Marcus's child, stirred slightly, a flutter of movement that reminded her of everything she carried with her into this new, impossible situation. "You're awake." Finn's voice came from just outside the tent, and Kira felt her heart lurch at the sound of it. Through the canvas, she could see his shadow. He was sitting with his back against the tent wall, exactly where he'd been when she fell asleep. Had he stayed there all night? Had he truly kept watch over her while she slept? "Yes," she managed, her voice rough with sleep. "I'm awake." The tent flap rustled, but Finn didn't enter. Instead, a weathered hand appeared through the opening, holding a wooden bowl that steamed gently in the cool morning air. "Breakfast," he said simply. "Porridge with honey. There's bread too, and some dried fruit. I thought you might be hungry." Kira's stomach growled in response, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. She was starving. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a proper meal. The rations in the cage had been barely enough to keep her alive, and before that? She took the bowl from his hand, their fingers brushing briefly. Even that slight contact sent sparks dancing up her arm, and she heard Finn's sharp intake of breath from the other side of the canvas. The mate bond. It was real. It was powerful. And it was absolutely terrifying. "Thank you," she whispered, cradling the warm bowl against her chest. "There's a stream about 50 paces east of the camp," Finn continued, his voice carefully neutral. "I've arranged for you to have privacy if you want to wash. Some of the other soldiers have extra clothing that might fit you better than—" He paused, and Kira could almost hear him choosing his words carefully. "Better than what you arrived in." She looked down at herself, at the tattered dress that still smelled of smoke and fear, at the bruises on her arms from the cage bars, at the dirt ground into every fold of fabric. She must look like a wild creature, a broken thing dragged from the wilderness. And yet Finn spoke to her with respect, with care, as though she were something precious rather than something discarded. "I would like that," she said softly. "To wash? To change? Then I'll arrange it. Eat first. You need your strength." Another pause. "I have duties to attend to this morning, but I'll check on you throughout the day. If you need anything, anything at all, ask for me. Anyone in the camp can find me." Kira ate slowly, savoring each bite of the sweet porridge and the crusty bread. Through the tent wall, she watched Finn's shadow rise and move away, and she felt the mate bond stretch between them like a golden thread, pulling taut but never breaking. "What am I going to do?" she thought, her free hand pressing against her belly. "What am I supposed to do with any of this?" She had no answers. But for the first time in weeks, she had a full stomach and clean clothes waiting for her, and a mate who seemed determined to protect her rather than possess her. It was more than she'd dared hope for. The stream was cold and clear, fed by mountain snowmelt that made Kira gasp when she first stepped into the shallows. But the shock of the temperature was worth it for the feeling of the dirt and fear washing away, flowing downstream and leaving her feeling almost new. She scrubbed herself clean with handfuls of sand from the stream bed, careful to keep her movements gentle over the curve of her belly. The child seemed content, stirring lazily in response to the cold water, and Kira found herself smiling despite everything. "You're a stubborn little thing," she murmured, running her wet hands over her skin, "just like your father." Marcus's face flashed through her mind, his crooked smile, his kind eyes, the way he'd laughed when she told him about the pregnancy. He'd been so happy, so full of plans for their future together. And now he was dead. his blood soaking into the earth of the pack territory she'd once called home, and their child would never know his face. Tears mingled with the stream water on her cheeks, and Kira let them fall. She'd learned over the past weeks that there was no point in fighting grief. It came when it wanted and left when it was ready, and all she could do was endure it. But this time, the grief felt different, less like drowning and more like releasing. As though the cold mountain water was washing away not just the physical dirt, but some of the emotional weight she'd been carrying since the night her world burned. "You're still here," she told herself fiercely. "The baby is still here. And maybe, just maybe, there's a chance for something better." She dressed in the clothes that had been left for her, a simple linen shirt that was too large but wonderfully soft against her skin, and loose trousers that accommodated her growing belly without binding. Someone had even left her a leather belt to cinch the shirt at her waist, and soft boots that fit surprisingly well. When she emerged from the trees that screened the bathing area, she found Finn waiting for her at the edge of the clearing. His breath caught when he saw her, and Kira felt heat rise to her cheeks. She knew she was no great beauty. Her mother had always told her she was too thin, too pale, too ordinary to attract a proper mate. But the way Finn was looking at her made her feel like something precious, something worth protecting. "Better?" he asked, his voice slightly rough. "Much better. Thank you for arranging." "Tribute." The shout came from across the camp, and Kira flinched instinctively at the harsh tone. She turned to see a group of soldiers approaching, 3 men with sneering expressions and hostile eyes. The one in the lead, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cruel twist to his mouth, was staring at her belly with undisguised contempt. "So this is the little whore who's been keeping our Finn occupied," the soldier said, stopping a few feet away from them. His companions laughed, ugly sounds that made Kira's skin crawl. "Heard she came in a cage. Heard she's carrying some other wolf's bastard in her belly." Kira's hands moved instinctively to cover her stomach, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was what she'd expected. This contempt. This cruelty. This was how the world treated women like her, women who'd been discarded by their packs and sold as tribute. But before she could respond, before she could even try to defend herself, Finn moved. He didn't speak. He simply stepped forward and drove his fist into the soldier's jaw with a force that sent the man crashing to the ground. The impact was brutal, the crack of bone against bone echoing across the clearing. The soldier's companions stumbled backward, their sneers replaced by shock and fear. "Anyone else?" Finn's voice was cold, deadly calm. "Anyone else want to disrespect her?" The camp had gone utterly silent. Kira saw soldiers emerging from their tents, drawn by the commotion, their faces showing varying degrees of surprise and unease. And suddenly, she understood. They were afraid of Finn. Not just wary or respectful, but genuinely deeply afraid. As though they knew something about this quiet, scarred soldier that she didn't. As though they recognized an authority in him that went far beyond his apparent rank. "She is under my protection," Finn continued, his voice carrying across the camp with a power that made Kira's wolf shiver in recognition. "The child she carries is under my protection. Anyone who disrespects either of them answers to me. Is that understood?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered soldiers. The man on the ground groaned, clutching his broken jaw, but no one moved to help him. They were all too busy staring at Finn with expressions that ranged from fear to outright reverence. "Who are you?" Kira thought, her heart racing. "Who are you, really?" She saw the way the soldiers lowered their gazes when Finn looked at them, the way they seemed to shrink back even though he hadn't raised his voice. She felt the power radiating from him, alpha authority so strong it made her knees weak. This was not a common soldier. This was something else entirely. Finn turned to her, and for a moment his eyes held hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Come with me, he said quietly. We need to talk. Finn led her to a smaller tent at the edge of the camp, away from the main cluster of soldiers. It was sparsely furnished, just a bedroll, a small table covered in maps and papers, and a chest that looked as though it contained weapons rather than personal belongings. Sit, he said, gesturing to the bedroll. Please. Kira sat, her hands clasped in her lap, watching as Finn paced the small space with barely contained energy. His scarred hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. You're not just a soldier, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. He stopped pacing, his back to her. No. Then who are you? For a long moment he didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words and half-formed truths. Kira found herself holding her breath, waiting, her wolf pressing against her skin with desperate curiosity. Finally, Finn turned to face her. His golden eyes met hers, and she saw something in them that looked almost like fear, as though he was afraid of how she would react to what he was about to say. My name isn't Finn, he said, his voice low. It's Griffin. Griffin Silvermane. The name hit her like a physical blow. Silvermane, the ruling pack of the Eastern Territories, the most powerful wolf pack in the realm, and Griffin, the Alpha King, she whispered. He nodded, his jaw tight. Kira's mind reeled. The Alpha King, the ruler of the Silvermane Territories, the most powerful alpha in the region, the man whose very name made other wolves tremble. And he'd been sleeping outside her tent, bringing her breakfast, defending her honor against common soldiers who didn't know who he really was. He's your mate, her wolf reminded her fiercely. He's your mate, and he's a king, and he chose to protect you before he even knew who you were to him. Why? She managed, her voice shaking. Why are you here, pretending to be a common soldier? Griffin ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that seemed almost vulnerable despite his obvious power. There's a traitor in my ranks. Someone who's been feeding information to my enemies. Someone who's responsible for... He stopped, his expression darkening. For things I can't prove yet. I needed to root them out from the inside, to watch and listen without anyone knowing who I was. And me? Kira asked, her heart in her throat. Was I part of your investigation? No. The word was fierce, immediate. No, you were never... He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, dropping to his knees before her so that their eyes were level. I didn't know who you were when I volunteered to take responsibility for you. I just saw a woman who'd been treated brutally, who deserved better than to be thrown to the soldiers as a servant. I wanted to protect you before I knew you were my mate. His hands hovered near hers, not quite touching, as though he was still giving her the choice to pull away. Something electric sang between them, warm and insistent, and Kira felt her wolf pressing toward him with desperate longing. And now? She whispered. Now everything has changed. His golden eyes burned into hers. You're my mate, Kira. My true mate. Chosen by fate and blood and something older than either of us. And that means... He stopped, swallowed hard. That means I have to tell you the truth about everything, including what I've discovered about who destroyed your pack. Kira's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Griffin's expression shifted, hardening into something dangerous. Your pack's destruction wasn't random violence. It was orchestrated, deliberately planned by someone who wanted to weaken the borders of Silvermane territory. Someone who's been working against me for years. Who? The name fell from his lips like a death sentence. Darius Nightshade. That night, Kira sat alone in Griffin's tent. He had insisted she take it again, while he was called away to the far edge of camp to investigate reports of suspicious activity near the eastern perimeter. I'll have guards posted outside, he'd promised, but the guards never arrived. Later, she would learn they'd been deliberately misdirected and tried to process everything she'd learned. Darius Nightshade, the alpha of the Shadowfang pack, Griffin's rival and longtime enemy. According to Griffin, Darius had been slowly, systematically attacking the smaller packs that bordered Silvermane territory, weakening Griffin's defenses and preparing for an eventual assault on the Silvermane throne itself. And her pack, her small, insignificant pack that had never been involved in politics or territorial disputes, had been destroyed simply because they occupied land that Darius wanted. Marcus died because of Darius Nightshade, Kira thought, her hands trembling. My home burned because some power-hungry alpha wanted to undermine his rival. The rage that rose in her was unlike anything she'd ever felt before. It was fierce and hot and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. Her wolf, dormant for so long, stirred in response, pressing against her skin, demanding vengeance for their lost love and their burned home. But beneath the rage, fear coiled in Kira's belly like a living thing. Griffin had warned her that Darius was cunning, that he had spies everywhere. If Darius discovered that the Alpha King's mate had arrived at this military outpost, if he learned about the mate bond that tied Kira to Griffin, he would use that information against them. I'm a weakness, Kira realized, her hand pressing against her stomach. I'm a weakness that Darius can exploit. The thought made her feel sick. She'd already lost so much. Marcus, her home, her pack. The idea that she might now put Griffin in danger simply by existing, simply by being his mate. A sound outside the tent made her freeze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Footsteps, quiet, deliberate, circling the tent in a way that felt wrong. Finn, she called softly, using the name the camp still knew him by. No response. Kira rose slowly, her muscles tensing. Her wolf was suddenly alert, pressing against her skin with an urgency that made her breath catch. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. The tent flap rustled, and a face appeared in the opening. A soldier she recognized from earlier, one of the men who'd been with the soldier Griffin had struck. His eyes gleamed with malice in the flickering torchlight. The Alpha King's mate, he said softly, a cruel smile twisting his features. Darius Nightshade sends his regards. Behind him, Kira saw shadows moving in the darkness, more men, more enemies, closing in on the tent where she sat alone and unprotected. She opened her mouth to scream for Griffin, but before any sound could escape, a hand clamped over her lips and the world went dark. Kira woke to darkness and the taste of blood in her mouth. Her head throbbed with a pain that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat, and for a terrifying moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the memories came flooding back, the soldier's cruel smile, the shadows closing in, the hand over her mouth. And panic clawed its way up her throat. She was bound, her wrists tied behind her back with rough rope that bit into her skin. The ground beneath her was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of pine needles and something else. Something musky and wrong that made her wolf recoil in instinctive fear. She could hear voices nearby, low and urgent, and the crackle of a fire somewhere to her left. Forcing herself to stay still, to keep her breathing even and her eyes closed, Kira listened. Should have killed her immediately, a rough voice was saying. The Alpha King will tear the forest apart looking for her. That's exactly what we want. This voice was different, smoother, more cultured, with an undertone of cold amusement that made Kira's skin crawl. Let him come. Let him exhaust his forces searching while we prepare our trap. By the time he finds us, it will be too late. And if she's already dead? What leverage do we have then? A soft laugh. She won't die. Not yet. She's far too valuable alive, the Alpha King's mate, carrying another wolf's child. The scandal alone could destabilize his rule. And if he refuses to surrender his throne to save her? The voice dropped lower, taking on an edge of cruel anticipation. Then we ensure her death serves a purpose. The bond between mates is a useful lever. Apply the right pressure, and even the strongest alpha will make mistakes. Kira's blood ran cold. Darius Nightshade. It had to be. The alpha who had destroyed her pack, murdered Marcus by proxy, burned her home to the ground, and now he held her life in his hands. Her wolf stirred, pressing against her skin with desperate urgency. Fight, it seemed to say. Survive. Protect the child. But how? She was bound, outnumbered, and her wolf had been dormant for so long that she wasn't even sure she could still shift. The trauma of Marcus's death and the weeks of captivity had left her feeling hollow, disconnected from the fierce creature that lived inside her. Griffin, she thought, and she could still sense him through the bond, distant but present, a thread of warmth in the cold darkness. Griffin, please find me. Footsteps approached, and Kira forced herself to remain limp, to give no sign that she was awake. A boot nudged her side, not quite a kick, but close. She's still out, the rough voice reported. How long do we wait? Until dawn. The smooth voice, Darius, she was certain now, moved closer, and Kira felt his presence like a weight pressing down on her. The Alpha King will have discovered her absence by now. He'll be searching, calling in his forces. By morning, he'll be desperate enough to walk into any trap we set. The boot withdrew, and the footsteps moved away. Kira heard more voices, the sounds of movement and preparation. An army, she realized. Darius had brought an army to take her, and now he was using her as bait to lure Griffin to his death. I won't let that happen. The thought rose in her with sudden, fierce clarity. I won't be the weapon they use to destroy him. Slowly, carefully, Kira began to work at the ropes binding her wrists. The rough hemp scraped against her skin, drawing blood, but she ignored the pain. She thought of Marcus, whose love had been gentle and patient. She thought of the child growing inside her, innocent of all the violence that surrounded its conception. And she thought of Griffin, the Alpha King who had knelt before her like a supplicant, who had slept outside her tent to keep her safe, who had broken a man's jaw for speaking ill of her. Her mate, her chosen. The one who had looked at her swollen belly and seen not a burden but a blessing. She would not let him die for her. The ropes were tight, but Kira was determined. She worked at them silently, methodically, using the blood from her abraded wrists to slick the hemp. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. Time had lost all meaning in the darkness, and still she worked, her muscles cramping and her fingers going numb. And then, finally, she felt the ropes loosen. Kira went still, listening. The camp had quieted, the voices fading to occasional murmurs. She could hear the fire crackling, could smell the wood smoke and the sharp tang of fear sweat from the soldiers nearby. They were afraid, she realized. Afraid of what the Alpha King would do when he found them. Good, she thought grimly. They should be afraid. She slipped her hands free of the ropes, biting back a hiss of pain as circulation returned to her fingers. Moving slowly, she opened her eyes and found herself looking directly into a pair of cold, calculating gray ones. So you're awake. Darius Nightshade crouched before her, a smile playing at the corners of his thin lips. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way, with high cheekbones and silver-streaked dark hair. But there was something wrong about him, something that made Kira's wolf bare its teeth in primal warning. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? He reached out and caught her chin, forcing her face up toward his. I could smell the change in your breathing, the spike of your fear. You're a terrible actress, little wolf. Kira spat in his face. Darius recoiled, shock and fury warring in his expression. Then he laughed, a low, ugly sound that made her skin crawl. Interesting. I'd wondered what Griffin saw in damaged goods. His tone was almost conversational, which somehow made it worse. Now I understand. He always did have a weakness for lost causes. You won't break me, Kira said, and her voice came out stronger than she'd expected. His presence anchored her through the bond, distant but approaching, drawn toward her like a compass pointing north. You won't break me, and you won't break him. You're going to die here tonight, Darius Nightshade, and no one will mourn you. His smile faded, replaced by something colder and more dangerous. Brave words. He released her chin and straightened, his expression shifting to something almost pitying. But I've broken braver. The difference between you and them? He smiled, and the warmth in it was somehow worse than cruelty. They at least knew when they were beaten. I do hope Griffin arrives in time to see you learn that lesson. He never finished the sentence. A howl split the night, deep, resonant, and absolutely terrifying in its raw fury. It was answered by others, dozens of them, rising from the darkness like a symphony of vengeance. The camp exploded into chaos, soldiers scrambling for weapons as dark shapes burst from the tree line. Griffin had found her. Darius snarled, his form beginning to shimmer as his wolf pressed against his skin. "Kill her!" he screamed at the soldiers. "Kill her now, before—" Kira moved. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it. Her body simply acted, driven by instinct and the desperate need to survive. She threw herself backward, away from Darius, and reached for her wolf, her broken, dormant wolf that had been hiding for weeks. "Please," she begged, "for the baby, please." For an agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then she felt the mate bond flare in her chest, felt Griffin's presence rushing toward her like a beacon, and her wolf answered, not with ease, but with a grinding, excruciating effort that felt like dragging herself up from the bottom of a deep well. The shift took her, more painful than any she'd ever experienced. Bones cracking and reforming with agonizing slowness, her body fighting the transformation even as her wolf demanded it. She screamed as her skin rippled into fur, the sound becoming a howl as her vocal cords changed, and suddenly, she was no longer a bound captive but a wolf, smaller than most, but fierce with a mother's protective rage. Darius turned toward her, his own shift halfway complete, and Kira lunged for his throat. Her teeth caught the soft flesh beneath his jaw, tearing deep. Hot blood flooded her mouth, copper and salt and the sweet taste of vengeance. Darius roared, trying to throw her off, but Kira held on with all her strength. She thought of Marcus, his gentle hands and patient smile, dead because of this monster. She thought of her home, burning in the night while she was dragged away in chains. She thought of her child, innocent and helpless, whose life this creature had threatened. No more, her wolf howled. No more death, no more loss. This ends now. Darius's claws raked down her side, and pain exploded through her. She lost her grip, tumbling away, but she'd done enough damage. Blood poured from his throat, and he staggered, his shift failing as his body struggled to heal. And then Griffin was there. He was magnificent in his wolf form, massive and black as midnight, with eyes that blazed like molten gold. He hit Darius like a thunderbolt, bearing the wounded alpha to the ground. The sounds that followed were brutal, savage, and utterly final. When it was over, Griffin stood over Darius's broken body, his muzzle dripping blood. The enemy soldiers had been subdued or slain, their resistance crumbling the moment they saw their alpha fall. Silvermane wolves circled the clearing, their eyes gleaming with fierce loyalty. Griffin shifted, rising from his wolf form in a ripple of muscle and shadow. He was naked, covered in blood and dirt, and Kira had never seen anything more beautiful. "Kira," he breathed, and then he was running toward her, catching her as she shifted back and sagged with exhaustion. His arms were warm and strong around her, and she could feel the mate bond singing between them, relief and joy, and a love so vast it threatened to overwhelm her. "You found me," she whispered. "Always." He pressed his forehead against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I will always find you. I felt you, felt your fear, your determination. I felt you shift, felt you fight." His hands cradled her face, trembling slightly. "You are magnificent. You are magnificent." He glanced toward the body of the soldier who had kidnapped her, the one who had smiled and said Darius Nightshade sends his regards. "The traitor I was hunting. He was one of Darius's plants all along, feeding him information about our movements, our defenses. When I saw him running toward Darius's camp with you," his jaw tightened. "At least now I know why our intelligence kept leaking. And he'll never betray anyone again." Kira laughed, and it came out as something closer to a sob. "I couldn't let him hurt you. I couldn't let them use me against you." "I know." Griffin kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corners of her eyes. "I know, my fierce, brave mate, but you're safe now. He's gone, and he will never threaten you or our child again." "Our child." The words wrapped around Kira's heart like a warm blanket. Not her child, not the other wolf's whelp. Our child. She looked past Griffin to where Darius's body lay broken on the ground. The alpha who had destroyed her world, who had murdered by proxy and manipulated and schemed, he was gone. Just a corpse now, cooling in the pre-dawn air. And she felt no guilt, no remorse, only a vast settling peace. It was over. It was finally over. Griffin's soldiers wrapped her in a cloak, tended to the wounds on her side, superficial, already healing thanks to her wolf, and helped her onto a horse for the journey back to camp. But she refused to let go of Griffin's hand, and he didn't seem inclined to release hers either. The connection between them had grown stronger than it had been before, forged in fire and blood and the shared determination to survive. By the time they reached the Silvermane stronghold, a massive stone fortress that rose from the forest like something out of legend, the sun was setting again. Kira had slept through most of the journey, exhausted by the shift and the battle and the sheer overwhelming emotion of everything that had happened. But she woke as they passed through the gates, and she saw the people gathered there, wolves in human form, watching with curious eyes as their alpha king returned with his mate. Griffin helped her down from the horse, his hands gentle on her waist. "Welcome home," he said softly, and the word home made something in her chest clench with desperate longing. "Home," she repeated, testing the word on her tongue. It tasted like hope, like possibility, like a future she'd never dared to imagine. That night, after she'd been bathed and fed and examined by the pack's healer, who confirmed that both she and the baby were healthy, that the shift had been a miracle of maternal instinct rather than a danger, Griffin came to her. He knocked before entering, even though it was his own chambers, even though she was his mate. The courtesy made her eyes sting with tears. "May I come in?" Kira was seated by the fire, wrapped in a soft robe, her damp hair falling loose around her shoulders. The flames painted golden light across her skin, and when she looked up at Griffin standing in the doorway, her heart felt too full to contain. "Always," she whispered. He crossed the room and knelt before her, just as he had in the tent, putting them at eye level. His hands found hers, warm and calloused and impossibly gentle. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Something I should have said before, when I first revealed who I truly was." Kira waited, her pulse quickening. "I love you." The words fell from his lips like a confession, like a prayer. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe the moment I first saw you. Maybe the moment you spat in my face when I tried to help you. Maybe the moment I felt your courage through the bond as you faced down Darius Nightshade. But I love you, Kira. Not because of the bond, not because fate chose you for me. I love you. your strength and your spirit, and the way you refuse to break no matter how much the world tries to shatter you." Kira's throat was too tight for words. She lifted one trembling hand and pressed it against his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm, the warmth of his skin, the pulse of his life. "I love you too," she breathed. "I think I've loved you since you slept outside my tent, keeping watch like a guardian. Since you gave me your name when you had every reason to protect your secrets. Since you told me you would claim my child as your own." Griffin turned his head, pressing a kiss to her palm. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. This powerful alpha king, this warrior who had destroyed his enemies without mercy, crying for love of her. "I want to claim you," he said hoarsely. "I want to mark you, make you mine in blood and bond, but only if you want it, only if you're ready. I'll wait as long as—" Kira kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and hungry, and full of all the longing that had built between them since that first electric moment of recognition. She poured herself into it, her grief and her hope and her love, and felt him respond with equal intensity. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she said, "I'm ready. I want you to mark me. I want everyone to know that I'm yours." Griffin's eyes flashed gold, his wolf pressing against his skin. "And the child?" "Our child." She took his hand and pressed it against the gentle swell of her belly. "Yours in every way that matters. I want that too." He made a sound, something between a groan and a growl, and swept her into his arms. He carried her to the bed as though she weighed nothing, laying her down on the soft furs with reverent care. His hands were shaking as he undressed her, as he traced the planes of her body with wondering fingers. "So beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "So incredibly beautiful." Kira arched into his touch, her wolf howling with joy. Heat blazed between them, undeniable and fierce, demanding completion. She pulled him down to her, wrapping her arms around his neck, pressing her body against his. "Now," she whispered. "Please, Griffin. Now." He positioned himself at the junction of her neck and shoulder, where the claiming mark would sit. She felt his breath against her skin, felt the press of his fangs as they descended. "Mine," he growled, and then he bit down. White-hot pain seared through her, making her cry out. But almost immediately it began to transform, the agony melting into something else. Pleasure so intense it bordered on overwhelming, warmth flooding through her veins like liquid sunlight. The mate bond, fragile and partial before, exploded into full bloom. She felt everything. Griffin's love for her, vast as an ocean, his fierce protectiveness, his desperate relief that she was safe, his joy at having finally found her, and beneath it all, flowing through the bond like an undercurrent, his acceptance, his welcome, his utter lack of reservation about the child she carried. Our child, she felt him think, and the words wrapped around her like an embrace. Ours, forever. The bite seemed to last an eternity and no time at all. When Griffin finally released her, licking the wound to help it heal, Kira was trembling with the intensity of what had passed between them. But she wasn't finished. She pushed against his chest, and he rolled obligingly onto his back, looking up at her with eyes that blazed with love and desire. Kira straddled him, positioning herself over the place where his neck met his shoulder, the mirror of her own mark. "My turn," she said, and felt her own fangs descend for the first time. She bit down and tasted his blood, and felt the bond complete. It was different from this side. She was the one taking, claiming, marking him as hers for all the world to see. Griffin groaned beneath her, his hands gripping her hips, his body arching into hers. Through the bond, she felt his absolute surrender, not weakness, but trust. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the territory, giving himself to her completely. "Yours," he gasped, "always yours." When she released him, they lay tangled together in the furs, both panting, both trembling with the aftershocks of what they'd just shared. Kira could feel the mark on her neck, warm and pulsing with the bond. She could see the matching mark on Griffin's shoulder, already healing into a pale crescent that proclaimed him hers. "Mate," she whispered, pressing her lips to the mark she'd made. "Mate," he agreed, his arms tightening around her. "Forever." They lay there as the fire burned low, wrapped in each other and the warmth of the completed bond. Kira could feel Griffin's heartbeat against her chest, steady and strong. She could feel his love for her, no longer hidden or held back, flowing between them like a river of light. And for the first time since the night her home burned, she felt truly safe. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment and discovery. Kira learned the rhythms of the Silvermane stronghold, the morning training sessions in the courtyard, the afternoon councils where Griffin discussed border disputes and trade agreements, the evening gatherings where pack members shared meals and stories around great roaring fires. She was fitted for new clothes, given chambers that adjoined Griffin's own, introduced to the pack healers who would attend her when the baby came. Some of the pack members were wary of her at first, an Omega from a destroyed pack, carrying another wolf's child. But Griffin's open affection and the visible mate marks on both their necks silenced most whispers before they could spread. 3 weeks after the claiming ceremony, Kira stood beside Griffin on the steps of the Great Hall, looking out over the assembled pack. Hundreds of wolves in human form, their faces upturned, waiting. The autumn sun blazed overhead, and the air smelled of fallen leaves and wood smoke, and the electric promise of change. Griffin raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "My people," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "I present to you my mate, my queen, my Luna, Kira Silvermane." A roar went up from the crowd, howls and cheers and the thunderous sound of hundreds of hands clapping. Kira felt the pack bonds forming around her, threads of connection weaving through her chest, linking her to each and every wolf present. It was overwhelming and beautiful and absolutely perfect. Griffin's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "The child she carries," he continued when the noise had died down, "is my heir. Any challenge to this will be met with the full force of my wrath. This pack will be their pack. Their blood will be Silvermane blood. And they will be loved and protected as fiercely as any child born of my body." More cheers, more howls. Kira felt tears slipping down her cheeks, but she didn't try to hide them. Let them see. Let them see how much this meant to her. This acceptance, this belonging, this home she'd been given after everything she'd lost. That night, lying in Griffin's arms in the great bed they now shared, Kira listened to the sounds of the pack settling around them. She could feel them through the bonds. Families gathering, children being tucked into bed, lovers seeking each other in the darkness. An entire community, and she was part of it now. She belonged. Griffin's hand rested on her belly, where their child was growing strong and healthy. In just over 3 months, they would meet this little one, the child conceived in gentle love and carried through fire and blood to safety. Kira was nearly 6 months along now, her belly round and proud beneath the ceremonial gown. The child who would be heir to the Silvermane throne, raised in love and plenty, never knowing the fear and violence that had marked the first weeks of their existence. "What are you thinking?" Griffin murmured against her hair. Kira smiled, feeling the mate bond hum with contentment. "I'm thinking about how much has changed. A month ago, I was in a cage, being sold as tribute, sure that I had nothing left to live for. And now?" "And now?" She turned in his arms, pressing a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. Now I have everything: a mate who loves me, a child who will be cherished, a pack that has accepted me as their Luna. She looked up at him, and her heart felt too full to hold. I have a home, Griffin. After everything, I have a home. He kissed her softly, reverently. You will always have a home with me, Kira. Always. For as long as we both live and beyond. The bond between them had settled into something unshakable, not pulsing now but simply present, as steady and certain as the ground beneath their feet. Outside, the moon rose over the forest, silvering the trees and casting long shadows across the land. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, not in warning or grief, but in pure, simple joy. And Kira howled back, her voice blending with Griffin's, their song rising into the night sky like a promise. They were home. They were together. And they would never be parted again.